Selamat siang, Pak Nurul, Ichwan, Deputy Minister, Ibu Laksmi Kusumawati, Director at Bappenas, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I've been informed that I will be asked to keep my presentation relatively succinct, so I will really try to give you the highlights and findings and recommendations of our investment attraction plan. But rest assured, the highlights we and I present today are only a snapshot. You will have plenty of opportunity to look at some more of the detail of the plan, which we are sharing online, and you can look at your leisure afterwards. And of course, we remain available for any questions and discussions. The discussions only start today. But I really, as was mentioned, want to give you a sense of the approach that we adopted in developing this investment attraction plan. And it really started with trying to ascertain what is it we're looking at, which sectors and which sector groupings do we want to look at. And I think, as has been alluded to already by speakers previously, it was a joint effort by looking at the priorities that Indonesia has, both at a ministry-specific level, but the broader overarching government of Indonesia's objectives in areas such as downstreaming and a range of other areas, coupled with the EU's own overarching priorities, guided to a large extent by the Global Gateway. So very much the first stage of informing this plan's development was what are we going to look at, and selecting the sector groupings. We then conducted a series of what we call supply side and demand side analyses. So the supply side analysis, or set of analyses, really was an exercise in benchmarking Indonesia on a range of factors that matter to European investors, and in fact matter to many investors globally, but we had data and consultations that informed what is it that matters to European investors when making decisions on foreign direct investment projects. So we benchmarked Indonesia on a range of thematic areas, but also sector-specific areas. We then looked at the demand side. In other words, where is investment coming from which countries, from which regions within those European countries? And from that, we obtained a lot of member state and subnational level insights. And we also delved down into some more detail on the drivers, the motivations of investment by different sectors, because there are some differences within those. We used all of this information to then determine a set of priority segments, and I emphasize segments, not sectors, because in the world of investment promotion today, it's not just enough to promote your offerings in renewable energy or your offerings in electronics. You have to go deeper than that and actually look at which segments of opportunity offer the greatest opportunities and where Indonesia has the greatest value proposition to take to market. And so we really prioritize those segments based on FDI track record of EU investors investing not only in ASEAN, but Asia more broadly. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail later on. But also looking at the track record in terms of job creation, in terms of capital expenditure, but within those, the types of projects that investors in those segments were undertaking. Were they R&D intensive? Were they in advanced manufacturing? And so on and so forth. So a lot of data underpinned this exercise and was enriched by the consultations we had. So that led us to determine, and you'll see these later, a set of segments that are prioritized for investment attraction. All of that is insight. And from there, we went into action. So what are we going to do with all of this insight? And so I'll give you some reflections and 6 strategic actions that we have outlined with the ministry in terms of taking this investment promotion and investment attraction agenda forward with the team of partners, both here in Indonesia and in Europe. So as already been mentioned, we looked at 6 key groupings and thematic areas: renewable energy, healthcare and pharma, electronics and ICT, automotive, with a focus, of course, on the EV supply chain, transport and logistics, agribusiness and fisheries. And as my colleague Alessandro was mentioning, not just sectors, but looking at cross-thematic and cross-cutting thematic areas. So things like digitalization, the green, the blue, the circular economy, technology, downstreaming, they sit across multiple sectors. So we bore these thematic areas in mind as we went through the exercise. So this was the base for all of our work and analysis. I think, as I've already alluded to, the plan was not just informed by data alone. You need a qualitative and quantitative approach to advise a plan like this. So we drew on more than 40 one-on-one consultations, primarily with existing EU investors here in Indonesia, but also industry experts, investors that are elsewhere in the region, especially Singapore, but not only Singapore, and as well as investors in Europe, that we've had the pleasure of engaging with as part of this exercise, who are looking at Indonesia but are not here yet. So we had a wealth of qualitative insights, and that's where the rich insight, the one-on-one consultations and honest opinions on where businesses saw opportunities in the immediate term and potential longer term to be. But of course, there's a limit to the number of one-on-one consultations one can have. So we enriched that with a series of multi-stakeholder, sector-focused consultations, discussions, and site visits, both here in Indonesia and in Europe. As of course, sectoral thematic benchmarking analysis, we draw on Indonesian data, but also international data from the likes of the Financial Times, the Dow Jones, and others to really give us some quantitative insights into what was happening in those different sectors, and of course, literature reviews as well. So I won't go through all of the insights. There's certainly not time to do that today, but to give you a brief snapshot of the insights that we used, I alluded to earlier, we needed some insights to determine what matters to European investors when making investment decisions. What you're seeing here is a very macro picture and looking at different determinants that were cited by European investors when they announced an investment decision. And this is looking at the global picture. We have different insights in the plan that look at a more granular level. But essentially, you can see on the charts here, I know it's a little bit small to read, but as you would expect, the size of the markets or the potential for market growth and the proximity to markets or the access to markets for more export-oriented investors are major factors that would come up a lot. But as you go down, these different lines and bar charts, you have things like skilled workforce availability, the regulatory environment, transport infrastructure, the presence of an industry cluster. These are also factors that matter to some degree. Even areas like government support, which is that last little column within the red box, smaller, much smaller than the others, but also non-negligible. The fact that investors have said an IPA support was instrumental in enabling us to make that investment decision is I think, a revealing insight, and one that was underpinned by the consultations that we had. So we took a look at all of this type of data, other subsets, and consultations with investors to look at what matters to investors. So if this is what matters to investors, we conducted an exercise of looking at how Indonesia compares with a number of comparator countries on a number of these factors. So we've looked at market size, workforce, regulations and business climate, infrastructure, and logistics, and within those have selected a number of different metrics. Again, maybe a little bit difficult to read here. I'll make a couple of brief comments on the table, and then you can look at this in more detail when you have the plan in front of you. But first to say, of course, we've benchmarked Indonesia against some of its ASEAN peers, the likes of Malaysia, Vietnam, and others. But as was mentioned earlier by Ibu Laksmi, Indonesia is its key prominent role as a G20 member, the only member in ASEAN. It is an Asian powerhouse in the true sense of the word, and a global powerhouse increasingly. So we thought it was relevant and important to benchmark Indonesia with the likes of India, Brazil. We also looked at some trends and tendencies with China as well. And what you see essentially here in this color coding series of circles on the left is where we see Indonesia either having a competitive strength, holding its ground, i.e. it's kind of middle of the range, it's neither the strongest nor the weakest, or areas of challenge. So clearly areas of strength, the GDP, it speaks for itself. Even in some aspects of the regulations and business climate, while there are challenges in terms of regulatory restrictiveness, FDI hurdles that we all know about, within some areas there are some competitive strengths. The OECD is well known for having done a regulatory restrictiveness index, but the last time that was done was before, of course, the all-important omnibus law. So we've drawn upon different sources to look at what's going on here. And I would say that even in some of these areas where Indonesia is potentially holding its ground, like global talent competitiveness. There's a big study that's done by INSEAD. Again, here it's holding its ground, but this table only tells part of the story. You look into the plan and you'll actually see that Indonesia is one of the key improvers on that metric, one of the most improved countries, and its trend and tendency is to constantly go up that ranking. So there's some really good indicators of the direction of travel that Indonesia is taking on a number of these metrics, which in turn are important messages that investors need to hear about. Because these investment decisions will often take 18 months, 24 months. Investors, having a conversation with an investor can be at a different stage of their thinking. So it's always worth having a conversation with a potential investor who's at the early stage of exploring a market to say, A, what are, of course, the strengths, but what is Indonesia undertaking in order to enhance its climate in that regard. So again, just some insights and perspectives we've had. The report will contain many more qualitative insights and data-based insights on the different sectors and thematic areas that I don't have time to go into today. But just to give you another snapshot of insights that we've used. So we talked a little about the supply side. Earlier I mentioned the demand side. Where is investment coming from? And we've looked at the different sectors. We're of course also looking at the subsectors and segments to see which regions or which clusters or which cities throughout Europe are seeing high levels of outward FDI projects into this region, into Asia as well as ASEAN. So this is the Asian picture. And essentially, I think the point I'm trying to make here is that when you're looking to target, say, Germany or France, or indeed any member state, you need to look at the pockets and concentrations of outward FDI activity within those different countries. So of course you'll see many capital cities across Europe referenced as being important centers of outward FDI, but there are other places in other parts of various European countries that are also very active in terms of outward FDI, and that needs to inform the overseas engagement strategy that BKPM and its partners undertake in Europe. And again, I think the other point I would make is, of course, it's countries large and small from across Europe represented on these lists. And this is just the top 10. Of course, there are active concentrations and plenty of promising investors from across the bloc that are going to be looked at as part of the exercise. So, talking a little bit about prioritizing sectoral segments. We essentially had three key considerations when prioritizing the segments that we wanted to look at. So first of all, has there been a strong track record of FDI from Europe into ASEAN and Asia more broadly? Have there been a big number of projects? Has there been a significant amount of capital expenditure? Many jobs created? And what types of projects? In what segments? What types of business activity do these areas look to invest in? Is it R&D, advanced manufacturing, education and training? All of this was looked at. The qualitative side, point two, have investors and industry experts reference the segments that we're looking at from data as an attractive investment opportunity in Indonesia, chiefly in the immediate term, but also thinking about potential longer term opportunities that Indonesia should be looking to promote. And then the third point, which I think underpins what was mentioned earlier by a few of the speakers, to what extent is FDI from that segment going to bring benefits to the host country? We use, in terms of data, capital expenditure, number of jobs, but we've also got lots of other insights that suggest certain segments, of course, bring various other qualitative benefits in terms of technology transfer, know-how, a range of other areas as well, better salaries, the list goes on. So we looked at these three areas when considering the segments, and we essentially developed two priorities. Priority one, tier one, would be where that segment has strong indicators across all those three considerations I mentioned. Strong FDI track record, it's been an identified area of opportunity from the private sector, and it's beneficial FDI on numerous metrics. These are the areas that should be prioritized for proactive investment attraction, ensuring a degree of focus, of course, with limited resources. But we're not in the business of excluding segments, but we're ensuring a degree of prioritization. So for that reason, we have a number of tier two potential sectors or segments that have strong or reasonably strong indicators with one or two of those three considerations I mentioned. These can also be considered for proactive investment attraction, but maybe less of a priority than the tier one. And of course, over the life cycle of a plan like this, certain tier twos may migrate into tier ones, and so on and so forth. So it's not set in stone, but it gives a sense of strategic purpose and focus in terms of who we go and reach out to across Europe. So I'm not going to show you 6 of these tables because I don't have the time, but maybe just to give you a snapshot of what the attraction plan contains. What you're looking at here is a matrix table that combines data, but also our guided judgments based on consultations of what should be tier 1 and tier 2 segments. So this is for the ICT and electronics cluster. And again, maybe not the easiest to read, but on the left, you'll see a series of segments underpinned by data in terms of the level of activities we've seen in terms of FDI from Europe into Asia. A similar exercise was done for ASEAN level as well. And then we're looking at capital expenditure, the number of jobs, and then was the segment actually coming up in the consultations we had with investors as an area of viable, attractive opportunity for investors. And you see a number of different sectors that have emerged there as priorities. And I'll just very briefly comment on a couple of them for the electronics. I'll do something similar briefly for the others. So software, a massive area of opportunity, by far the lead in terms of the number of projects we've seen into Asia. And of course, software development, not only active, but it underpins so much of the value-added investment that can happen in Indonesia across a whole range of sectors. Smart logistics, smart cities, precision agriculture, and a range of others. Semiconductors, very capital intensive, but many of the segments of semiconductors are also very knowledge intensive as well. So within that, we see that as a great area of opportunity, but again, not in all areas of the semiconductor value chain. Wafer fabrication is probably quite a far way off, but maybe there are some opportunities in R&D, certainly some opportunities in assembly, testing and packaging, which is already happening, and a number of others. I'm looking at the clock here, so I really will just move on, but this really just gives you a sense of where the opportunities are. And then similarly, we've done the same exercise with those tables for the other sectors we've looked at. And so renewable energy, particular opportunities in captive power generation, but also on the manufacturing side, electrical equipment and manufacturing, maintenance, servicing, refurbishment. And of course, more broadly, many power generation opportunities there for the taking, subject to the right conditions in terms of power purchase agreements in solar, wind, biomass, tidal, and to an extent hydro. But solar particularly an area where there's a lot of outward European investments in Indonesia. Transport and logistics, freight and distribution, IT-enabled smart warehousing, cold chain logistics, and a couple of other areas as well. Life sciences, an area where there's already a lot of European activity, but scope for a lot more. Pharmaceutical preparations, medical equipment and supplies, and of course, medical devices is a vast area, but we've identified some areas within medical devices, ultrasound equipment, assembly, and others, where there are great areas of opportunities. Biological products and in vitro diagnostic substances, the list goes on. Similarly, for automotive, continued opportunities in assembly, some opportunities in manufacturing as well. And then the actual equipment. We talk a lot about EV batteries, but there are other areas and other components where segments have been identified as significant areas of opportunities. Brake systems being one of them in particular. Heavy-duty trucks, green trucks, as well as EV charging stations. And of course, some of these areas are also ones where BKPM have ready to offer projects to take to investors beyond the broader concept of opportunities. Agribusiness, again, quite vast, animal food, nutrition and health, the horticulture value chain, right through from cultivation through to processing, the use of advanced technologies in terms of vertical farming and hydroponics. So the opportunities are really out there. Seafood and fisheries production, as well as non-food agricultural manufacturing. So farming machinery and equipment, precision agriculture, and other technology-enabled solutions. So strategic actions, I'll be very, very brief. I think number one, re-establishing this desk is key to really underpinning so many of the other actions listed on this slide that follow. but we're really delighted that the desk can be re-established in view of the much more active landscape of European stakeholders that are now either here in Indonesia or looking at Indonesia. The DFIs, the fact that you've got the JETP Secretariat, the fact that you've got Bappenas' joint PPP office, and a range of others means that now has never been a better time to re-establish this desk. Identifying new SDG-oriented investment projects. There are 81, correct me if I'm wrong, Nurul, I think that's the current latest number, but of course there could be scope for many more. And while you can't have IPROs for every single conceivable project in Indonesia, there's definitely, I think, scope to do more. And I think, with the support of EU partners, specialists in various different areas of the sectors we've looked at, there's scope to develop more of these projects and package them in a way that really piques investors' interest. A consolidated voice, number 3, in Europe through enhanced partnerships, so leveraging the traditional partnerships of embassies and chambers, but some of the newer players, these cluster organizations in Europe that are now host to a number of increasingly internationalizing firms that are looking at investment opportunities and forging partnerships with entities like that. Is a great area of opportunity, as well as the DFIs that we've already mentioned. Number 4 is really about collaboration, of course, within Indonesia to speak with one voice and present those opportunities in a joined-up way. Of course, BKPM as the lead IPA has that mandate to be the voice of Indonesia, but we know, of course, other ministries and entities at a national and subnational level have a role in investment attraction. So the Team Indonesia approach for taking those opportunities to market and speaking with one voice is something I think that will be really good. Regular sessions, of course, Eurocham, bilateral chambers, various different institutions have various sessions, but I think there's scope for more of these types of sessions to unpick investment opportunities in specific segments identified, but also to talk about specific thematic areas of importance. And of interest, both to the EU and to Indonesia. There's an opportunity for more of these types of dialogues. And then, of course, a role when it comes to the company levels, one-on-one consultations and discussions with individual member states on companies that we think actually might be interesting. It's an exercise that has begun already and is going to continue. Really, very, very briefly now, just to say some of the stuff we've been doing in terms of helping to implement or leading to the implementation of this plan. We identified through our resources more than 670 companies from across the EU, leveraging some of the databases and other insights I alluded to earlier. That a long list was originally based on companies that are looking at Asia, have at least one or more project in Asia, and or have a significant growth rate, or have a reasonable turnover. So that was the rationale for the long list of companies we developed. And from that, we went to an initial tranche of shortlists. What we've done is we've developed up to 25 companies per sector grouping. We discussed with BKPM's teams on these companies. So we have 25 for each sector grouping, giving us a total of 150 companies. These have been selected on BKPM's own wishes and insights, looking at their CRM to see what engagements have happened, but also views from our own side on interesting companies to approach, as well as looking at those companies' track record and levels of FDI. And of course, it's now for us to have conversations with individual member states on those companies to seek their views. Thank you. I know I've gone slightly over time, but I hope you've given you a sense of what we've done. Terima kasih.